Hi, everybody. Welcome to Festiva to Go and to the Law Channel. And why you say we need a law channel? Because everything in this country is based on law. This country was founded on laws, and we need lawyers. And talking about lawyers, with us today, in today's program, we have one of the members of the law firm, Levin Rojas, Camasur and Rec. Welcome, Paul Levin, to our program. How are you, sir?
Thank you, Eno. Nice to be here.
Great to have you here. I'm intimidated when I see a lawyer, because for normal people like me, we only see lawyers when we're involved in a traffic violation or we have to be represented. And as I heard yesterday, we need lawyers, unlike what people say out there. And I was explained the fact that if it wasn't for lawyers, we'd all be in trouble. And it's great to have you here because we have some good questions here to ask you that you're going to bring to our public and maybe dismiss a lot of the myths out there about lawyers and law. All right? You ready for a question?
Okay. Ready.
Listen, this is something that you don't hear too often, but I want you to explain to me what is this thing, mass torts? What are mass torts? I never heard the words before. I never heard this phrase before. But could you explain in a manner that everybody understands what mass torts are?
So there's lawyers that have been practicing for decades that don't know what a mass tort are.
Really?
Yeah, it's true. So think about the things that you eat, the drugs you put in your body, the medical devices, environmental hazards that you don't know might be environmental hazards, and a lot of products that corporations make, obviously, to make money, hopefully to better the lives of the people who are using them. But the problem is a lot of what we have access to, a lot of what we eat, drink, breathe, and ingest, it comes without the necessary level of safety to protect everybody. And sometimes we don't know that right away. Sometimes it takes people getting sick and hearing rumors and stories, and then there's a scientific investigation. And then after years go by, sometimes decades, well, then the federal government issues a warning or a recall or says, hey, be careful about this, or some scientific journal. But in the meantime, everybody that's exposed to these things, they have real consequences. Sometimes very, very serious health consequences. I can give you examples. But so a mass tort is in that category of things that can hurt you that you don't always have an awareness of. And it crosses state lines, it crosses cultural lines. So it can hurt somebody in Arizona, it can hurt somebody in New York, and it can affect the family members and the health and welfare of people. Usually you're talking thousands of people, sometimes tens of thousands of people. It's usually not something that just happens to one person.
Mr. Levin, would this be the same as a class action suit?
Little different in the sense that a class action suit is usually over money. The airline didn't do this and they owe me $50 and there's 1,000 people just like me. But in a situation like this, the 1,000 people, it's not a coupon for $50. Some of them have cancer. Some of them have been spending time in the hospital. Some of them aren't alive anymore.
So all the plaintiffs are not treated the same.
They're all individualized damages, and so you can't have a common formula. What does one person deserve doesn't match what the other person needs.
Okay. Can you give us an example of a recent mass torts that we can recall from the news, or maybe a very famous case?
So the one you probably know about is the opiate epidemic that was in this country,
of course,
with Purdue Pharma and hiring marketers and basically cheerleaders to entice doctors to sell more prescriptions.
Oxycontin?
Oof. And so this resulted in a massive national lawsuit, which is a mass tort. And the opioid litigation, and it's still ongoing because there are smaller manufacturers and distributors, because there's some blame to go around here. It's not just the manufacturer, it's also the people who sold it and gave it away. So that's billions of dollars in accountability that is going to go to the families of people who were affected. And some of the lawyers that we're working with, our firm is working with, actually initiated that litigation and did so successfully.
Okay, some people might say, well, this mass torts helps the average individual out there that was one way or another hurt, but is this going to raise the price of the drugs that I use, that that company produces, because now that company has to protect itself, and it's going to raise the prices on the other drugs. Is that a possibility?
So look, everybody has to decide, do you want safer products and things that you're exposed to and paying a few dollars more for them? Is safety an option where they can just decide to design it in or test it and make sure? Or would you rather have just lower prices to begin with? And by the way, if you test it and you design it correctly and you go through the extra due diligence that, we want our doctors to go do this for us, we want the lawyers, for example, to show some due diligence, it's cheaper in the long run because you get a better product or service and you don't have the consequences, which actually costs a lot more. All the people that get sick and die, before they die, they go through hospitals and bills, and a lot of them are uninsured, so the taxpayers are paying them. So in the end, as a society, we're paying for it either way. So we either pay more to get more, or we pay less and we get less.
Okay, on a situation with the asbestos situation, where so many people, so many construction workers contracted cancer of the lungs and all that, how do you get in touch with everyone, and how could you guys prove that a person contracted cancer because of his contact with asbestos?
So that's one of the reasons why we really are backing this concept of a law channel where the information, the accessibility of this information is democratized. Now people don't have to just look at a billboard or look at a website or get into their Facebook group and now they're getting targeted, because that's how, to answer your question, that's how a lot of the mass tort firms are getting their people. They're using digital technology and they're basically giving lawyers a bad look, right? When I grew up, it was nice to be the concept of a lawyer. My uncle was a judge. My grandparents told me lawyers are very valuable members of society. And in the last 10 or 20 years, I don't think that lawyers have the same relevance. They're not looked at the same way. I think car salesmen have better reputations than lawyers. And that's part of the reason, I think, is because of the lawyer advertising and because they chase, it's the ambulance chasing, but they're doing it in mass torts too. And so if we could actually tell people what's going on, and in any given mass tort, there's usually 3, 4, 5 firms that are actually doing the work. They're the leaders, and they don't need to advertise. They're known, and they're the ones doing the work in the trenches, having the relationships, and we know them. We work with them because we're leading a mass tort ourselves. Our firm, we're doing one. So that would be a really good change, so that people can get access to their lawyers and the information to know who is going to be able to help them, rather than the way the system is working now. Now, your second question was?
My second question was, my God, what are the benefits that these people in mass torts have? What are the rights that they have that you can defend? And how can you prove those rights? How can you prove that there's someone liable?
So causation is a scientific and legal analysis. It requires both. You need somebody who's an expert if it's a chemical issue, if it's an environmental issue. So you need somebody who has that knowledge base, which lawyers don't. They have to base their information not just on what they think themselves, but on peer-reviewed studies, normative knowledge that society and judges can look at and say, okay, this isn't something some guy made up in his garage because some lawyer is paying him, $50,000 to say it. So you have to present evidence to the court to even get to a trial to say this is a legitimate, scientifically grounded theory. The causation isn't something that you made up or you can't prove. And then, you're going to have disagreements. You're going to have experts on each side that's going to say, the defense is going to say, maybe there's some danger, but it doesn't cause what you're saying, or it didn't cause it in your case. And so the judge's role in that situation is not to determine necessarily who's right at the outset, just to make sure that going into the courtroom and going before the jury is not complete junk science.
Are these cases always tried by a jury, or are there cases where a judge is the decision-making factor?
Generally speaking, the lawyers like us that do the mass torts, we want juries to decide these cases because we have a higher level of comfort and trust in the jury pool and members of our society who are going to be determining these issues, then, judges are great, but some have certain perspectives. They came from different points in their career. They may have been more affiliated, with a defense firm. Their political spectrum may be a little bit, different than some of our clients might be. So in general, we trust the judge's intellectual capacity to determine what's junk science and what's not, to give the lawyers on both sides fair opportunity and a good, administrative judicial machinery so that the important issues of the case are there. But in the end, we want, these are societal issues. We want juries to decide this. Just like if you were a criminal defendant, you probably would want a jury of your peers to determine whether or not you're going to jail.
There's a more of a case where the jury can identify themselves more with the people, the plaintiff. Another question here is, in a situation where, what was a Roundup situation? Monsanto's is the name of the parent company.
Correct.
It's a big multinational company. Can these lawsuits be taken at the international level?
Interesting question. So right now, each judicial system is sort of determined on a country-by-country basis. We are very lucky in this country because if you wanted to do this in France, for example, they have a different system. You have to go through intermediaries. You don't get direct discovery where you can confront, the witnesses and the scientists and the people that did the wrong thing, right, for their company. There's an appointment process, and this specialized administrative individual then reports back to the court their findings. So you're even removed from the information in a direct confrontation. And by the way, in the French system, sometimes it can take 10 or 15 or 20 years to get a resolution. And the problem is not to say that we don't have cases that take a long time sometimes, but if you're in a situation where you're trying to get compensation and or you're trying to stop a product from being available, because we also seek injunctive relief sometimes, where we try to get something stopped or recalled because the FDA is not doing their job, or some agency is not doing their job, or some agency member wants to go to work for that company maybe when they're done working for the agency, and they give them a little bit of discretion. These things, all kinds of things can happen because we're all humans. But in this country, you have the ability, the legal system's really set up to allow the lawyers to, in a sense, be another arm of government, right? Because we're holding to account the companies that are doing this, and they apologize with their money, right? Mm-hmm. They apologize with their pocketbooks. There's no other way you're going to get attention here unless you bring, a team of lawyers on a project like this.
Okay, you mentioned the team of lawyers, but I suspect that there's a tremendous amount of expenses in your part putting together a group of investigators and people that are going to scrutinize everything that happens so you can have a strong case. Until the case is solved, who foots up the bill? Who pays for all these investigations?
So the lawyers do. The system allows for what's called contingency fees. And contingency fees mean the lawyer absorbs the costs up front, and the client does not have that risk. If on the successful outcome of their case, then they pay a flat percentage fee, which could be 33% or it could be 40%, depends. And then 60% or 66% will go to the client. But you're right, it's very expensive because you're dealing with multi-billion-dollar corporations, and they're going to defend their product, and they're going to go after the lawyers. And for example, we started the baby formula litigation, our firm, 5 years ago, when the first client walked in the door and said, my thriving baby was doing well, and then we fed, at 40 days or 35 days, we fed this formula, which they sell in Walmart, right? It's formula you can get, but to a preterm baby, to a premature baby, and the baby developed this dastardly disease, perforated their intestine, and then they died very shortly. They couldn't even endure surgery. And this was actually happening to thousands of babies, we learned. And so we took on Abbott and Mead Johnson, one little firm out of Connecticut. We have a license in New York through a federal court district license in New York through one of the partners. We're also active in Rhode Island, but really we're primarily based in New England.
Okay.
And so our little firm takes on, and they went after the lawyers. They should write a book at what they did.
Really?
They tried to have a sanction.
They don't play too clean, right?
Chicago rules.
Uh-huh.
This is different.
Exactly.
Don't attack the client's position and their legal reasoning and the scientific causation. Go after the lawyers. And go after the clients.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Mr. Levin, what happens in a situation like, let's say, with the cigarette case, where so many people died of cancer of the lungs? What happens when all these plaintiffs have died maybe decades ago? Are the relatives allowed to collect some of the monies for the damages?
So very interestingly, many of the states have what's called tolling statutes, Tolling. Basically, it allows somebody who didn't know that their rights were affected under certain circumstances to extend the statute of limitations. So for example, we're representing babies who some of them lived from the harms and the surgeries, and now they have short gut syndromes or neurodevelopment issues. But it took maybe 15 or 18 years until they knew, or their parents knew, that they had there was causation, and that this was really why they had such difficulties. So certain states are more generous in terms of the tolling statutes, but most every state has a discovery rule where if you didn't know that your rights were affected, you didn't know you had a right to pursue your rights because you didn't know they were violated, so you have additional time. And then, of course, when there's active concealment or fraudulent concealment on the part of the country. So there used to be a time when the doctors were asked by the tobacco companies to basically do commercials, and you'd have a doctor saying, I don't smoke a lot, but when I do, and when I recommend to my patients, it's Lucky Strikes. Mm-hmm. So they would actually get the machinery of the well-known people who society would trust to become their agents. And tobacco played it really dirty. Like that litigation, they used every trick in the book. They got Madison Avenue marketing geniuses. They commissioned studies, bullshit studies, scientific nonsense, and they denied that their product was hurting anybody. At the same time, they're selling it and then extolling the virtues of using their products. You'll be sexier, you'll be healthier, girls will like you more, you'll smell better.
Are they allowed, Mr. Levin, and you mentioned studies, because I think I was reading about a brand of cigarettes that conducted studies saying that nobody has died from smoking the cigarettes, nobody has coughed even, and nobody has contracted more colds than the other person that don't smoke. Why were they allowed to show a study that they conducted themselves privately on television? Did the laws change? Are they still allowed? They're still allowed today to do things like that?
So we have a variety of factors at work. So you have the First Amendment, which basically gives people the right to have free speech. You have free commercial speech. And, we do want entities to go ahead and conduct studies and spend money and prove out their points. But we also have a scientific rigor. And so you can conduct a study, do it in your own laboratory, not share the data and the basis of how that study was conducted and whether it's genuine, and not give access to third-party reviewers, scientists, and other journals to take a look and pick it apart and say, this is nonsense. The sample's too small. Your data was corrupted. You didn't have, a proper structure to your study. It's meaningless. It proves nothing. And, we can look at those studies. So, look, you're going to do a study, publish it, make it available, and then don't rely on it. Give some time for the community to actually react to it and then learn from it. And it's not illegal to conduct your own study and rely on even false conclusions. It is, I would say, actionable, legally actionable, to knowingly set up a bad study or inaccurate study, promote that study as being accurate and proving whatever the point is, that you won't die, you won't get hurt, and then sell the product on the basis of that study, probably not even talking about other studies that have a contrary conclusion. All in all, deceiving the public and promoting your product to make money. And look, if the worst thing that's happened is you wasted money on a product and it didn't work, we're not going to be all that unhappy, and there'll be a class action over that. Mm-hmm. But if you start hurting people and they didn't even know they were putting their loved ones and themselves at risk, and then it becomes uncovered that this has happened, I've seen in that situation, the lawyers have a real task here because, without us, when I was a kid, we used to have this guy, Ralph Nader. I never
Sure.
understood what he did. I heard he made
Corvair.
seatbelts mandatory and crash tests, and they weren't doing those things before he came into existence. I was in maybe high school when we first learned of him. He looked funny. He had funny hair, but he was a lawyer, right? And then we realized later on in law school that it wasn't the government that actually created standards and behavior that they had to adapt to. The agency started enforcing the things that the lawyer said you should be doing, because if you're not doing them, you're hurting people. So in the way the government agencies developed and followed the path that the lawyers were suggesting, and the defense people were saying, don't listen to the lawyers, they're lying, they just want to make money. And, of course, the lawyers want to make money, but the reality is that their companies were lying and wanted to make money, and then they're blaming the lawyers and tarring them, and that also didn't help the reputation of lawyers.
So, Levin, you mentioned false advertising. Are the advertising agencies involved in this propaganda machine to sell a product liable to in one of these lawsuits?
It's an interesting question. Generally speaking, we tend to focus on the parties that are directly causing the evil that's concerned.
Mm-hmm.
And, there's a remoteness concept in law, too. If an agency is just doing their job and they're doing it really well, that's kind of their job. If they knowingly are hurting people and they have that level of commitment, it could very well be that there's an angle to be pursued there. The tobacco companies hired, like I said, marketing studies. The infant formula companies hired the best of the best. They created a commercial that won like the equivalent of a Tony Award. They had mothers pushing a baby cart and yelling at each other about, why are you feeding formula? And then the breast police were coming, and they basically were saying, don't listen to people who say you should be breastfeeding. Buy our formula. And they were demonizing the breast police, the ladies that were saying, well, it's better for you. And then, the baby cart went flying down the hill, and then they worked together to go save the baby. And it was really well done. And I think they called it the Sisterhood of Motherhood or something of that nature. It won an Emmy, or the equivalent of an Emmy, and it sold a lot of formula. And the reason they developed that commercial is because formula sales were going that way.
Uh-huh.
And so they went and hired, and they do it all the time, and it's not illegal to do it. But the companies that are mismarketing and misbranding and actually deceiving the public, we are suing them for their marketing tactics. And their marketing tactics are basically subject to anti-consumer trade statutes. Okay. And so we're suing them for punitive damages, and we're suing them in Connecticut, for example. We had the Remington Arms Company, one of their subsidiaries, and there was this really terrible shooting you guys might have heard about, Sandy Hook,
of course,
where this young, disturbed, deranged teenager came in, who knows how the hell he got access to it, but he got access to an automatic or semi-automatic gun, and he shot a lot of these kids. And I know some of the parents. In fact, one of the parents is a lawyer in Connecticut, and it was terrible. And so one of the better firms that thought about this, even though they weren't involved in selling the weapon to this deranged kid, but they were definitely involved in making it available and making it look cool and just telling it it's not a military weapon, it should be available, for hunting. And so one of our sister firms in Connecticut sued this company, and their theory was basically a marketing theory, that you were marketing a weapon of mass destruction as a recreational tool. And for that reason, this kid got involved and was watching videos and everything else. And they wound up getting a very substantial settlement. Money's never going to be the answer here because these kids are gone. But you know what? Hitting them in the pocketbook probably does serve some benefit to these families. They do have other kids, and those kids will benefit and go to college, and it'll help them. But also, they'll put this company either out of business or they'll change the way they're doing things. And their insurance companies aren't going to want to insure them if they're going to be liable for $50 and $100 million verdicts.
They'll be thinking twice.
They'll be thinking.
Ladies and gentlemen, Law TV, of course. And thank you, Mr. Levin. You're a fountain of information about the law and what it takes to take to the place where these cases should be taken. And the phone number is right on our screen. You can call right now to obtain more information. And just to wrap it up, what can we expect from this channel in the future?
I mean, we were approached by Festiva to do this sort of a partnership between lawyers and what they think would be helpful, and then people who actually know more about what people are interested in and want to hear, and how could this be made, interesting and informative, and basically beneficial. So, I would think that we're going to have, websites that have like Law Channel, Law TV News. I would think that there could possibly be entire hours or partial hours dedicated to each different kind of law that is relevant. If you have family members that, have immigration issues, getting your information from real experts, not somebody that, just has a license and talks generally, but specifically about what to do. If you have criminal law issues, just to even know where to turn, I think there's got to be an alternative way that people can get their questions answered, their information, and then reach out perhaps to law firms that aren't doing the advertising. They're actually doing the educating. That would be a change.
Terrific. Remember, Law TV is where you're going to get all your legal information, everything you need to know about the law. Thank you.